Xerxes or one of the ancient Persian kings.
I was too. But
she could kick butt with that scepter of hers.
But that's what I love about your book. I mean, there's so many twists and turns.
We are the Front Page Pass, brought to you by Word Journeys, the literary world's hottest new podcast. Fellow publishing industry expert and author, illustrator, designer join together in bringing you the latest news, discussions, and literary-related entertainment for readers, writers, and educators alike.
Priestess of the Lost Colony. Chapter 1. Edawara moved her final pawn off the last square on the Senate board. She straightened on her stool and crossed her arms with a triumphant smirk, victory assured in the game of passing. By all the gods, not again! Beck slammed his hands on the ebony table, which knocked his two remaining pawns off the game board. There must be some mistake. Edawara laughed. What mistake? That you've been losing the past few times? I keep telling you, brother, you take these games much too seriously. You act as if the fate of all Parapahu depended on it. Beck narrowed his eyes as his lips curled into a snarl. I might not be wrong, then. If I am to govern this colony, I must hone my strategic skills. How can I do that when I keep losing to a priestess? Edawara didn't take one grain of offense. If anything, his righteous anger amused her even more. Remember what Father says. You do not need to succeed to learn. Beck opened his mouth for another retort but stopped, stood from his stool behind the table, and took a deep breath. His mahogany-skinned brow sparked with sweat from the afternoon sunlight that descended on a back courtyard. He stormed across the courtyard to an alabaster bench beneath one of the olive trees and plopped down to sulk in its shade. As entertaining as her brother's tantrums were at the end of every Senate game, any pleasure Edawara felt evaporated when she saw him wipe a tear off his cheek. Not since they were children had she seen Beck show such emotion unless he thought nobody was looking.
So, that was an excerpt from an upcoming guest, Brandon Pilcher, that we're going to be having on today. We're really happy to be having on from his book, Priestess of the Lost Colony, which was just recently published by Open Books Press. So anyways, welcome to the Front Page Pass, brought to you by Word Journeys. This is your host, Bob Yelling, and Alexa Black. So anyways, tell us a little bit, elaborate on Brandon and what all he's accomplished. And
yeah,
what he's got going on
Brandon
right now.
actually is the source of one of the warmest experiences and stories of my own editing career. Mm-hmm. I met Brandon 2.5 years ago through a mutual acquaintance, and Brandon is on the autistic spectrum. He's on the spectrum. He's autistic. He's highly developed, specifically with verbal skills and drawing skills.
Absolutely.
I mean, he's both an author and an illustrator, and he's fabulous at both.
It's very impressive.
And in the last 2.5 years, he came to me with a chapter and an idea, and no idea how to write a book. Mm-hmm. And just through a lot of tough a lot of hard work and learning and him opening up to the process, he ended up creating this fabulous story that's set 3,600 years ago. That, I mean, you feel like you're there the whole time.
Such immersed world building too that went into it. It's very fascinating.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So really, so I'm always happy when any author gets their book published, because and as you know, as an author, it takes a tremendous amount of work to even write a book. Mm-hmm. But this has a little bit of an extra special touch to it because of the personal challenges Brandon's overcome in his life, and also, also just the fact that it's harder than hell to get published as a first-time author, and he pulled it off.
He absolutely did.
So, so we'll be talking to Brandon in just a minute, but it's just a very special. It's a really special thing to be able to. To bring him on the show, and also just to know that he pulled this off, which is a magnificent accomplishment for him.
Yes, it is. It really is. And just to see how he's evolved over time is
and I mean he's published short story collections. Mm-hmm. He's drawn and sold quite a bit of artwork. Mm-hmm. He drew his own book cover.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And you don't often get that.
No,
with someone who writes as compelling as he does.
So this is a fascinating interview because he's a young guy. He's in his, by my standards, anyways. He's a young guy. He's in his early 30s, and he's on his way. And he's got another book going on, and yeah.
And he had to overcome more challenges than most. Like you said, and also being in this industry, it can be pretty
Right.
Serious.
Right. So we'll hear from Brandon in just a minute. But yeah, I was, and then, it's been a couple of weeks since we've been together
Yes.
Because
Bob has been on a road trip, and I'm a little envious.
Yes, I went on a road trip, and it was an interesting road trip. I mean, a lot of things happened. We're meeting for clients for Word Journeys and different authors, and talking to different people in the literary world. And the biggest takeaway I got from this trip, from writing wise, is we're getting ready to open back up. Social. In fact, some parts of society have. Most bookstores are open again now. They might have some sort of limited capacity limit. Definitely,
there are limitations.
Definitely limited events. You're still not seeing a lot of signings, but that's going to change, and it's going to change by the fall. I suspect the fall is just going to be gangbusters. I know in the publishing world, acquisitions are up 30% over this point last year.
Very true.
People are spending money. Of course, we readers have kept the industry alive by reading a ton of digital and otherwise ordering online for the past year. But what I've noticed when it comes to both writers and readers is, from now on, authors, to be really good at marketing themselves, are gonna need to be able to do stuff online as well as live. The advantage of going online is huge. It's a bit of a, we've all had a year to get used to it. So if we haven't gotten accustomed to it yet, the advantages are quite simply that if you do a Zoom live book signing, so where you read from your book, you read from your book, you talk about it, and then you put up some ordering information to sell the book. There's a Zoom program where you can have 400 people up on your screen at once.
And there are many authors that have actually gone that route.
Very rarely will you see a book signing with 400 people. Secondly, those people come from all over the world. And so if they like your presentation, they buy your book, and then they have friends. There goes a big word of mouth thing.
I mean, that's the advantage of the internet.
So the internet gives you a world audience, whereas a local book signing gives you the local audience. However, one feeds the other. So
and that's why I say that the industry as a whole hasn't necessarily suffered. We were all kind of put in that sink or swim situation, and to be quite honest, I feel like all of us as writers and readers decided to swim, and make use of having to do things solely online. So now that things are opening back up, people have honed their craft at building their audience, platform building, and everything else online, and now you take it out on the road. So
and I can tell you some tremendous events have come out, have been created online as a result. Just in in my home base, Southern California, there are two great events have emerged from this pandemic that are going to continue. One is BookFest, which is in LA, that my old business associate Desiree Duffy produces. And that's turned into one of the best, in 2 years, that's turned into one of the best online book festivals in the country.
Exactly.
She had, in the most recent version, which was 2 weeks ago, she had no less than 15 New York Times bestselling authors on there. So that's one that's going to stick around as an online event. The other one is the San Diego Writers Fest, which is getting ready to happen. It happens the end of May. And again, they went online, they figured it out, and they just came up with this tremendous program. Now, obviously, watching a book fest online isn't the same as sitting at the LA Times Festival of Books with 100,000 people and all these panels and stuff. But again, it gives writers now have the best of both worlds. We have a full complement of online tools we can use to market ourselves. And of course, going live.
Yeah, they completely adapted.
And for those of us who have been sitting in the cave or in our rooms or locked in our apartments or whatever for the past year, it's time to get ready to get back out, because people are going to be buying books like crazy in the fall.
And itching to go to these events and stuff.
And,
we've been...
and we're going to be speaking at Digital Book World again in September, so we're going to be getting back on the road.
I mentioned that on our last podcast as well, that Word Journeys, is going to be at quite a few events. And,
right.
And also streaming from them. We plan to do that too, and do some interviews with some of the best names in the game.
Right. So it's going to be a really it's going to be a really busy summer that leads to a monumental fall in book selling.
I would say so. I'm certainly looking forward to it.
It's just really nice to see that the publishing world did fine during the pandemic. I mean, some small publishers went out of business. Just like any other industry, there was attrition, unfortunately. There were some mergers and acquisitions. But the bottom line is people kept buying books, and now acquisitions are back up because everyone is pretty starting to feel like society's going to fully open.
Yeah, and it's pretty much just open the floodgates for people that are wanting to get out and everything. So
yeah.
Yep. It's advantageous there.
Yeah.
So I suppose we should read our chart toppers that we do.
We got it. Speaking of books coming out, let's talk about the top books that are out.
So I would do combined print and ebook fiction.
Okay.
So number 1 is Sully by John Grisham. Apologize. Finding Ashley by Danielle Steele. If you guys don't know who that is, look it up. I'm just kidding. Everybody knows who that is. A Gambling Man by David. How do you pronounce that name?
Baldacci.
Baldacci. Okay, I apologize. Fugitive Telemetry by Martha Wells, and The Hill We Climb by Amanda Gorman, which is a very excellent book, I must add. So
yes, it is. It is. And Amanda's the young lady who did the poem at the Joe Biden's inaugural address in D.C. in January. And I'll handle print and combined print and ebook nonfiction. What Happened to You is number 1 by Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. The Bomber Mafia, which was Malcolm Gladwell's latest book, and You Are Your Best Thing, edited by Tarana Brucki and Brene Brown. So really, the number 1 and number 3 nonfiction bestsellers are all about self-improvement, self-care, getting out of the pandemic. It's kind of interesting.
And that genre really did shoot up during the pandemic as well.
I mean,
I can't recall what the stats were exactly.
Yeah, well, think about it. A lot of people couldn't see their therapists. They couldn't see their counselors. They couldn't be with their friends. They had to turn to something.
Self-help material and stuff like that. Self-improvement.
And here's number 4, same idea. How You All Doing by Leslie Jordan. And 5, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And that book is about how we internalize everything, whether we internalize happiness, we internalize anger, we internalize trauma, we internalize things that happen to us, good and bad, and our body keeps the score. So whether it's some sort of some pre-existing condition, something mental disorder, behavioral disorder, what have you, it all reflects from what we take into our body. And so 4 of the 5 books on the nonfiction top 5 are about taking care of ourselves as we emerge from the pandemic.
Really introspective reads.
Yeah.
So.
And now coming up next, we will have our exclusive interview with Brandon Pilcher, the author of Priestess of the Lost Colony. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say, because Brandon's a really interesting guy, and like his father Mark, we had a little celebration lunch for him last week in Carlsbad, California, to celebrate his writing of the book. And like his father said, you're not going to find many people that know more about the near ancient history of Greece and Egypt, meaning going back 3,000 to 6,000 years.
Yeah, his knowledge is vast.
And so and every time I talk to him, I know he has some other factoid or some other story from that time period that's just you think you've heard it, and then
you think you've read it all.
Yeah. But so it'll be really fascinating to see what stories he has for us this time. But most importantly, just to hear him talk about his book.
Yep, absolutely. So
okay, so we'll be back with Brandon in just a second. Okay, this week on Front Page Pass, we're delighted to bring in newly published author Brandon Pilcher. And Brandon, for me, this is a really personal and just a really heartwarming situation, because Brandon came to me about 2.5 years ago, and he had part of a chapter, and he had an idea for a book, but that's what he had. And he wanted to write a book, and he wanted to write a full book, and he'd written some short stories and has a couple of self-published collections on Amazon. But he wanted to write a full book, and so we've spent about a year and a half getting the book written, and then we went into producing it, and lo and behold, we found a publisher in Open Books Press out of St. Louis. So this book is Priestess of the Lost Colony, and it came out. It released 2 weeks ago, in late April, and it's doing very well so far. But we thought, we don't really need to tell the story of the book because we have the author right
Exactly.
here. So on that note,
In the
welcome,
flesh.
welcome, Brandon, and thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you for the warm welcome.
All right, and we're really happy to have you too.
Yeah, and it's been great to just see his evolution as an author and him really blossom. I mean, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
and go as far as he has.
Well,
It's
first
been
of all,
so-
I guess we got to ask you the first question.
Yeah.
What do you like more, writing or illustrating, since you also drew the cover?
Well, I guess I draw more often. I guess that's a little easier for me. Writing is more of a commitment. I guess, but I think writing is probably more of a. I don't know how to say it. I guess I just feel like I invest more in my writing than in my drawing. So I draw more often, and my writing is a bit more work or harder work for me, I guess.
So almost the writing is somewhat complementary to your drawing. I guess you could
Yes.
say. Okay, that makes sense. So when you do have these characters in mind, I'm curious. Do you, since you do say that you like to draw more so, do you draw them first and then the story comes to mind after the fact, or is it vice versa?
Well, and I think in this particular case of Priestess,
Mhm.
I think the character came to mind before the whole story did.
Okay.
Yes,
kinda
but
just
sometimes it's the other way around
okay.
with
So
other projects.
it kind of just built off that particular character. That's interesting.
Yes.
So, in Priestess of the Lost Colony, which is your new book, and it's a wonderful read. I mean, for us fans of fiction and us fiction, writing critics even, it has a really wonderful blend of historical fiction with an emphasis on ancient Egypt, but also Egyptian colonies in other countries. In this case, the ancient most Greece. But it has that historical fiction element. It's got a ton of adventure in it, to where, I mean, your plot twists and turns are magnificent. There's so many surprises in there, but it also has magical realism where you actually bring in ancient Greek goddess and creatures to create that kind of magical realism, supernatural effect in your book. I guess my biggest question is, where did this idea come from?
Well, it came from a couple of sources. The first were certain legends the ancient Greeks themselves had about Egyptians settling on their shores. Like there's a legend, for instance, that a couple of Egyptian priestesses founded the Oracle of Dodona, which is, I think, in northeastern Greece.
Right.
And there's another legend about, I don't know how to pronounce her name, but there's a group of women called Danaids who came to Greece who were descended from an Egyptian king. So that I thought that would be a great scenario for an alternate history novel, which is, I mean, this isn't really an actual event that happened. This is, of course, alternate history. Like it's a what if scenario.
Exactly.
Okay, and then and yet with all the nice fictional twists and turns that I mentioned and the different styles within this book, deep down it's a book about a young woman and her brother whose colony is sacked. Their fellow colonists are taken, or their fellow residents are taken, and they're on a rescue mission to get their to get their fellow citizens
And reclaim.
right. And but what I really like about your approach to this, as you're using an empowered young woman as your lead character, could you describe why you decided to do that, and also what you see in ancient women, that is so compelling to you that you would write a whole book about one?
Well, to be honest, I just like writing about pretty ladies. I mean, I like to draw pretty ladies. I like to give them stories, and that's pretty much it. And I yes, but about ancient women in particular, I guess it's just the time period that interests me in general. I mean, it's just ancient times. That's been a thing ever since we learned about ancient Egypt in second grade when I was a kid.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, regarding that, just to follow up on that, we could talk a little bit about Itaweret. So, exactly what is her mission, and how does she use her power and personality and wits to make things happen throughout this book? I mean,
Well, to introduce for readers who haven't read the book, Itawaret is the protagonist of the novel. She's basically works as a high priestess of the goddess Mut in the
Mhm.
colony, and she's actually the eldest child of the guy who runs the colony, the great chief Mahu,
Okay.
and her brother is actually the heir to the colony. And Itawaret is. Repeat the question again.
Oh,
lost
I
track.
said I was just kind of asking what is her missions throughout, and how does she use her personality and wit to kind of make things
Well,
happen throughout.
Well, her mission is she's called upon by the goddess Mut to rescue her people after the bad guy, the villain, and sacks their city and enslaves them. And she basically has this goddess guiding her, and she's able to persuade people into helping her.
Mhm.
And it, that's I mean, her power of persuasion is probably, I'd say, one of her most
Mhm.
compelling bits about her.
I would have to agree, definitely.
Okay. And so when we started working together, like I said, 2.5 years ago, what were some of the things that you learned in your own experience writing this book? What are some of the things you learned about the book writing process that surprised you? And what are some of the things you learned that are going to help you as you keep going forward on your next
Mhm.
novel, which is you're writing under the working title Woman of the Plains right now?
Oh, that novel. Oh, that novel is a different setting. It's set in Africa, in Eastern Africa, about 100,000 years ago. It's not really magical realism like this current
Mm-hmm.
book. It's more of a prehistoric fiction sort of book, more like historical fiction set in prehistoric times. And it's um, I guess what I think I learned is that it helped me a lot with writing Priestess to have an idea what was going on. Sometimes there are two strategies of writing, basically. Sometimes you just write as you go. Other times you have a plan or an outline. And I found with Priestess, I had an outline, but it was kind of a flexible one. And I found out that I had to add some things as I went along,
Mhm.
well, instead of just depending entirely on the outline. So I guess a flexible outline is what works for me best.
Mhm. As an author and illustrator, I'm just curious if there's anything that you do to get into the headspace of creating these worlds, because I know that's part of the best aspect of being into writing this genre is losing yourself in this world that you have created. So, is there really anything you do to prepare yourself mentally or get in that headspace? Any kind of rituals or anything? Or
I can't think of anything about rituals I used to get into a headspace.
Hmm.
I don't really I don't really understand the question, to be honest. I don't really have any special rituals.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, anything? Okay.
Okay. Well, can you? You're also a prolific short story author. You've written two collections that are currently on Amazon. And so, could you tell us some of the differences in your experience between writing a short story and writing a full novel?
I think a short story I can do more of the planning mentally. Mentally, like I can do it all in my head, whereas in a novel I have to basically write down little bullet points of what I want to happen and maybe come up with a general arc. I
Hmm.
think novels require more planning, basically.
Mhm.
Right. Okay. And so, since you live on the spectrum, your education was a little bit different than a lot of people's in that you did different kinds of specialized things. But could you tell me when you first found you were interested in writing and when you were first interested in drawing, and then some of the things you did as you were growing up educationally to become more proficient at both?
Well, I definitely took a few classes when I was younger, but I think my interest in drawing was I've been drawing since I was 5 years old. But I think I got really serious about it like when I was getting out of high school, like I was age 18, and that's when I started really investing in it and trying to get better than I was currently, and well, than I was at the time. And um, I think I've come a long way in my drawings due to constant practice and study since that beginning.
I'm curious
And
on what your mediums are when you do your illustrations. How what's your process like?
Well, it depends. usually what I do is draw the line art or the lines on paper with a pencil, and then I scan it in, and then I ink it and then color it on the computer using a program called Clip Studio Paint. It's also called Manga Studio, and it's basically it's a specialized art program. It's not like Photoshop, which is more general picture editing. It's specialized for art, and I really like that program. And I find it's, for instance, I'll notice the lines you draw on Clip Studio Paint a lot crisper than Photoshop, which is why I prefer it to Photoshop in general. I mean, Photoshop is more general editing, like I said.
Another thing I wanted to talk about, I guess the two of you can talk about since you designed the cover together, is the book cover. Now, it's highly unusual for an author, especially a fiction author, to illustrate their own cover, but that's what you did. And then, of course, you worked with Alexa on the cover design. And I guess this question is actually for both of you together. What were some of the themes you wanted to capture in the cover design, and and then how did you go about selecting the piece of art that you used to illustrate the cover, Brandon?
Well, basically, what I did was pick out the three most important characters, which are Edouard, her brother Beck, and then the third guy, which is actually a Greek guy called Philos. He comes along on their quest, and those were the kind of the three characters I really wanted there to be on there. And then I picked the background of the city of Perpehu, which is the colony, and I wanted that to be in the background. And basically, I just wanted to show what the basic who the characters were, what the setting was, and that was the most important for me. And then Alexa, what went into designing the cover?
Yeah, so Brandon basically, like he said, he sent me all the separate elements, the different characters that he wanted to emphasize on the front. And with such beautiful golden tones, I wanted to kind of throw in a bit of contrast. So I made the sky somewhat of a purplish color. It's also kind of it has a mystical feel to it. Also with the Egyptian eye on there as well. So basically, I would say I just arranged the pieces that Brandon had sent me and designed the hieroglyphs and etc. And just kind of really made all those merge together well. And I really enjoyed collaborating.
Yes, I did too. I think you did a great job merging those elements together, as you said.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and that's also why I mentioned pretty early on that your illustrations are so crisp, because I got to see them all up close. You sent me just such a large file, and yeah, it was really fun. A lot of fun to work with. It's probably one of the more fun covers that I've designed. So it was a blast. And on the back as well, it was cool because Brandon included the Antagonist. So I thought that was neat.
Yeah, that's always courageous to include an antagonist on a cover.
And what the protagonists are dealing with early on.
Right. That's Scott Silax right off. I mean, he's in chapter 1.
Exactly. So that actually would bring me to a question that I did have, because I like to emphasize that writing a compelling antagonist is just as important as writing your protagonist. So I didn't know if there were any tyrants in times past, considering how much history you know. Any tyrants that came to mind when you were writing Silax?
Well, we'll just say this guy, one of the tyrants that came to mind when I was designing him was one that was in politics relatively recently. That's all I'll say, because I don't want to get into a big political debate right now.
I got you. We'll leave it at that.
And here I was thinking of one of the Xerxes, or one of the ancient Persian kings.
I was too. But, yeah, fair enough, Brandon.
I suppose that a lot of tyrants are kind of share a lot of common characteristics. So there's probably a lot of guys you can find who are like him.
Mm-hmm. Right. So without doing too many spoiler alerts, what were one or two of your favorite parts of this book to write?
I guess it was probably creating the world. I mean, it's set in kind of based on the real world, there's also a lot of inventing, a lot of blanks you have to fill in, because there's not everything is documented. There's also creating certain cultures. Like there's one culture that features in the novel that is neither Greek nor Egyptian, but it's kind of a group of people called the Palacians, who were kind of, who the Greeks claimed were living in Greece before the Greeks themselves came from further east. And they were an interesting culture because to design, like, they're basically a bunch of hunter gatherers who who are dark skinned, like more like the Egyptians and other Africans, but they also have bright blue eyes,
Mhm.
and they're kind of inspired by finding of a person called Cheddar Man in Britain who lived about 9,000 years ago. He was genetic analysis revealed that he had a combination of dark skin and blue eyes, which you don't really find that often in the real
No.
world nowadays. And that was a big part of the inspiration for the Palacians. But they also have the Palacians in my book also have a tendency to put together monumental structures of built up megaliths, and that was inspired by Stonehenge and other Neolithic monuments in
Interesting.
Europe in our time period. So that was an interesting culture to design. That was definitely a fun culture to design, to make up, cobbling different elements of the real world together.
Yeah, well, what I found really interesting about how you structured your world is that you worked on like you said, you worked on the margins of what we know historically. I mean, there's many other time periods you could have chosen that would have made this book a lot easier to write as far as research goes. For instance, ancient Egypt, you could have gone to 3000 BC. Ancient Greece, you could have gone to 600 BC. But you chose this in between time of 1000 to 1500 BC, where really not a lot has really been chronicled about the interactions of the Greeks and the Egyptians. For one thing, I learned from working with you that there were Egyptian colonies in what is now Greece. I didn't know that.
That's not actually what actually happened. That's the alternate history aspect of it.
Okay.
I mean, the legends claim that, but I don't think there's any actual archaeological evidence for that actually happening. That's just me taking those legends and then building an alternate history based on it.
Well, legends always begin with at least a modicum of truth. So
sometimes.
Yeah. But my point, I guess, was you did a really ingenious job of world making, because you worked on these margins. You worked with legends. You worked with what could have happened historically. You weren't, but it added up to a really unique world, because nobody's that I know of is quite written about this time period and with these cast of characters the way you have. So that was a really good job. But I guess what my question to you is, did you want, and just like with the next book you're currently working on, Women of the Plains from 100,000 BC, do you prefer to speculate on what the history might be when you're creating a world, or do you like knowing what the facts and figures are?
I guess I prefer the speculation angle. It's more fun. You get to make up more. I mean, I do think that you need to know some things about some of what we do know, but I also like filling in the gaps with my own imagination. I actually find that if there are a lot of facts you have to know about a world, it can be kind of overwhelming. Whereas if there's more blank spots, it's less overwhelming. You get to fill in more with your own imagination, like I said.
Yeah, you kind of have more room to play. It's not so constrained when you're writing these characters and what unfolds throughout. So,
Yes.
yeah.
And we're with Brandon Pilcher, the author of Priestess of the Lost Colony, which came out April 27th through Open Books Press out of St. Louis. And Priestess is available through bookstores nationwide. It's also available on Amazon.com, and it's on OpenBooksPress.com as well, the website. So Brandon, when you were writing this book, I remember when in working with you, we really, there were a lot of times where you just had to take a step back and figure out what you're going to do next, which always happens when you're writing a novel.
Yes.
So what did you find were the biggest challenges to you in that process of just trying to build it into a full-length novel?
I guess it was I had to re-energize my stamina. That was one. I guess you get exhausted a bit after and burnt out when you're writing something this big. I guess also not sometimes when you kind of blanks in your outline, you have to know where you have to go next, and sometimes there's always that self-doubt that worries that what you end up writing is not going to be good enough. I imagine that's going to be the case with any kind of big project.
Mm-hmm. And I noticed in your characterization in the book, besides our main people, You also had a shamaness. You had a couple of fantastical beasts, I would say. Um, you had the bad guy Silax. You had a couple of, I would say, weak-kneed politicians. Alexandros would be
Right.
one of them. Um, on and on. You just have this wide variety of characters. So what are some of the things that you have to consider as the author when you're working with such diverse characters in the same story?
Well, you basically have to play. You figure out how they play against one another, and I mean, if you're writing a big cast with a lot of different characters, you probably have to consider how they would play off against one another when they meet.
Okay. All right.
That's true. And when writing dialogue or anything, do you kind of put yourself into the perspective of the character to kind of see how those would interact? I guess.
I guess the big challenge is not really that; it's figuring out how to make it sound good, considering it's a different time period,
That's true. Yeah,
and because you can't have them speaking the way we do today.
yeah.
But likewise,
Good point.
You do have to know but of course you do have to consider their motivation and what they want and what they're after.
Yeah, and have to focus on making it authentic, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah, and that's one of the things about writing authentic when he's talking about writing old times. You have to find a form of English that isn't like all wooden and archaic and formal like Shakespeare. That wouldn't
Yeah.
work. And yet, like he said, you can't sit here and use words like woke and cancel and all this other stuff we use now, because it's not that time period.
Yeah, you can't use the slang
Yeah,
so much.
but
It's
what
fun to find line.
I guess what we're driving at here is you found a nice little common middle on this where you just had them speak normal English with a little bit of formality at times, but nothing fancy, and you didn't use a lot of you didn't use current slang, which was great. So yeah, but I guess so. Did that take you a while to figure out, or did it just come to you? Or were you just listening to your characters?
It just came to me, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is a different example, I guess I'm bringing up, but I don't know if you've ever seen the show Spartacus. The guy who did the screenplay for it and everything, he had to really take that into consideration and focus on that, on how they would have possibly spoke, but like you said, about keeping it authentic, formal, but not throwing any slang or anything like that in there.
Right.
So that would probably be quite a bit of a challenge here. So. Well, I was going to ask, did you study any war strategies or anything that have occurred in real life to kind of apply them to the book and make the battle sequences or anything like that?
Well, I've looked a few things up in military strategy. I also play these games called Total War, which are basically historical battle simulator games. That's a franchise I've been subscribing to for a few years, and I find it does kind of help plan out battles like that.
I would say so.
And then, so as you go forward in your career, are you going to write more novels or more short stories or both?
Probably both. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I don't think I think I will probably jump between them. I mean, actually, with right now with my current novel, Woman in the Flames, I'm kind of focusing on that. I don't really want to get distracted by a side project when it comes to writing, but I mean, I might take a break from it to write a short story if one comes to me. But right now, I'm mostly focusing on Woman in the Plains when it comes to writing.
Okay. All right. And then, of course, I just want to remind our viewers and our listeners that once society opens up a little more, Brandon's going to be doing some book signings at various locations. He is based in Southern California, so he'll be mostly there. However, we are planning to have Brandon back a couple of times during the summer for special Zoom signings. So
Yes,
virtual
absolutely.
virtual signings where Brandon talks about the book, reads from it, and then people who come to can order on we'll give the ordering information and they can order online. Since that's kind of the way it's going right now, where post-pandemic authors will have to
Yeah.
both do Zoom stuff and do live stuff,
Simultaneously.
which is a great way to reach your audience.
It really is.
Yeah. So so how did you celebrate completing this book and getting it published?
Well, I guess we remember the time we went to islands together and had lunch. That's one way That's one way I remember celebrating.
So you could just talk a little bit about your fascination with ancient history, and in particular, ancient Egypt and the prelude to ancient Greece. You could kind of just talk about how you started getting into that, where your fascination came from.
Yeah,
and what it is about that.
did that start when you were a kid? Is it more recent?
It started when I was a kid, like in second grade when I was a kid, and it kind of over time expanded to other African cultures as well as other cultures of the ancient world.
Yeah, because I mean, it's just interesting how, like, I mean, I was a history buff when I was a kid too. Not to the extent you are with this, that's for sure. But it's neat how something that you've been into for over 20 years, you've been able to turn into a book.
Yes.
And obviously you're going to go to that ancient history thing with your next book as well. Let's see. So what are some of your plans with this book? Are you looking at doing some things where you do art signings and different showings of your illustrations, and then bring the book along with you, as well as doing author signings?
Yes, that's one thing I would like to do.
Yeah, because I can imagine something like the Comic Cons would
Oh, it
be
would-
all over this.
Absolutely.
Even if not San Diego, some of the other regional ones, they would be all over this. I know that there's an author I know named Claudette Marco who wrote a number of really good YA books years ago with a female protagonist, and she did really well selling in Comic Cons around the country.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah, so that's a really good possibility too.
Well, I was thinking I would kind of direct it back to the book a little bit because
Yeah.
I'm still curious. Because, of course, ancient people did believe in the supernatural and deities because I guess they had no other means of explaining things
Right.
that they couldn't understand. So I was kind of curious on how you making the mythological aspects, real within the book. Kind of helped move the story along rather than it just remaining, strictly myth. You actually brought these entities into your book.
I guess it helped spice up the story a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, rather than
I
just
agree.
having it be, if it were just realistic, it'd be basically a big drama. And I generally find period dramas kind of boring, actually. Well, with exceptions, but I kind of prefer a little fantasy element of this a little element, a little extra element to make it more awesome, more fanciful, I guess.
Kind of make it on a more epic scale, I suppose. Yeah,
And,
I agree
and
with
that
you.
I think
do.
that contributed a lot to his twists and turns.
Exactly.
And I was really fascinated with your twists and turns because at first I was trying to figure out how someone who hasn't written a novel before did so well with these twists and turns and these switches of directions. And then I realized, well, you're a short story writer. You have to do that. That's what short story writers do.
You
So-
can't really write a short story without something to spice it up to make it really to grab the reader and make it really interesting.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But that's what I love about your book. I mean, there's so many twists and turns that even if the text itself was ordinary, you don't have time to get bored. I mean, because as soon as you read a few pages, you got something else going on in there. Do you prefer like writing adventure in that way where you're twisting and turning it, or do you prefer in some of your other stories maybe getting deeper into a subject? Do you like pacing with those twists and turns?
I guess I do. It also helps lengthen the content rather than just focusing on one thing.
Yeah. And what if I know you've sent this around to some readers. So what have they said to you about the story itself? The ones that you've talked to.
I think a lot of them really like the world and some of the characters. Although
Yeah.
I kind of think I did get one review that said it was kind of too short for his liking. But you can't make everyone happy, I guess.
Yeah. Well, what I think's amazing is the book is fairly short. It's fairly short. However, it's got so much in it that it feels like a full. I mean, it feels full. That's why it's
It
a complete
does.
novel to me, because it feels like a full novel.
I mean, it's rich with content. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, someone could write 100,000 words and not even come close to how what all the stuff that you have in here. So,
I guess I just like serving things with the meat rather than
Yeah.
just adding a lot of extra filling that doesn't add anything. I guess that's my style.
Yeah. So tell us about a couple of a couple of places where you've exhibited your art in the past.
Well, there was one time when I was about in 2013 when I was working with a group of people called Raw Artists. They gave me a venue where I could exhibit some of my art. But to be honest, I still have the pictures framed up. But to be honest, I don't really. I'm kind of ashamed of them because my art style has evolved a lot in the past few years. So that I'm not really proud of any of the art that I created for that particular presentation, like 7 years ago or so. But I would like to exhibit more of my later pieces right now.
Okay, well, but anyways, this it's a fabulous backdrop you have. I'll say that it's just with all the main characters and everything. It's um, yeah, that's
Yeah, it
really
does
nice.
showcase how vivid and
Yeah,
the artwork is.
yeah.
I should probably duck my head so you can get a better view of the main heroine, Itarit.
Oh, there she is.
Yeah, she's
Uh-huh.
kind of in the where she's
There we
that
go.
would be her right there. She's in the middle of the composition, which is why you couldn't really see her for most of our presentation because my head was blocking her. But now you can see her.
Yeah, she's a very striking character too in general. One that I found very intriguing.
Yeah.
Definitely not one
Yeah.
you want to mess with, I would say.
Yeah, like she could kick butt with that scepter of hers.
I would say
That's one
so.
thing I will bring up.
Mhm.
I mean, she's not as much
Man,
of an action heroine as some of the heroines from my short stories, but
true. That's true.
she's not weak. That's one thing I'll
Not
say.
by any
She's not
means.
weak.
So what I'd like to say before we ask Brandon final questions
Mhm.
is Brandon will be having a live for our Southern California readers and listeners. Brandon's going to be having a launch signing, a live signing in September
Uh-huh.
in at the Wildwood Restaurant in Vista, and this is going to be great because the guys that own Wildwood Restaurant are all film documentarians. So what they do is they put the author on stage. Then the chef has the author go through
Mm-hmm.
food choices of that time period and
Mm-hmm.
culture, and they're going to create hors d'oeuvres, and that's what people eat when they come in.
I
Besides
know.
the full menu that's available, and then on top of that, it'll be Facebook and Instagram streamed because he's of all these documentarians that own the restaurant. It's going to be an incredible event, and it's in Vista, California, which is right next door to Brandon's hometown of Fallbrook,
Oh,
California.
it will be.
So that's coming in September, and we'll keep everybody informed through Front Page Pass and through some of our other some of our other media channels. So Brandon, in closing, what's some of the? I mean, you're a writer, you're an illustrator, you're a supremely talented guy, and you're also working hard at your craft. What gives you the most satisfaction when you work? I mean, what just makes you really happy about the things you do?
I guess it's just to really love what I'm doing. It's just really loving the subjects that are inspiring me to create this,
Mhm.
and also the hope that someone will look at my stuff or either my writing or my drawing and be touched by it or impacted by it in some way that they will connect to it somehow. I think every writer and artist feels that way to one extent or another.
Wonderful. I've really enjoyed the chat.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and um, yeah, it's been wonderful talking with you. And once again, Priestess of the Lost Colony
Mhm.
is now available through bookstores around the country and also on online bookstores, including Amazon and openbookspress.com. Open Books Press is the publisher of the
Yes.
book. And we've been chatting with Brandon Pilcher, who, like I said at the outset of this, 2.5 years ago, he we met with he had a chapter and an
Uh-huh.
idea, and it's turned into this book, and it's been a labor of love at times, a pretty hard labor of love, but we got through it.
But it's nice
And,
to see the evolution of it and how
yeah,
he's completely blossomed as a
yeah,
writer.
yeah,
So,
and so I guess my final question for you is: what are a couple of takeaways from the book that you feel that you feel will be memorable to readers, or you feel that will make readers more appreciative of that time period?
I guess it's learning how different cultures interacted and got along, and also how they should be getting along, and which is not always how they do get along. That's one takeaway. And also, there's a lot of messages in the book that I don't really want to spoil them for you
Okay.
too much, but I like to say there are a lot of thoughts. I did pour myself a lot into the text, so I hope the readers will learn a lot from it as they're reading.
I feel they will.
Okay.
Certainly.
All right. Okay, Brandon. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
great speaking with you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you for joining us at Front Page Pass, where we present everything from new titles to rocking interviews with best-selling authors and publishing experts, writing and editing tips, the latest on the bookshelves for readers, and live coverage of writers' festivals, conferences, and author signings. Our mission: to serve up the world in a thrilling, wonderful, and most adventurous new way.